everyone. Good evening and welcome to the most awaited session of this week, the favorite session, of course, samosachai.net session. I am Trishula Jain and I lead the developer marketing for Azure for Microsoft India. And my job is to excite the developers in India to use the latest and greatest tools, all on Azure and, of course, all the tools in Microsoft. So today we're going to be coming live to you from Bengaluru. The weather is awesome here. It's raining and what more, than having samosa and chai. So today's session is all about .NET Maui, multi-platform app UI, and we have three amazing tech SMEs who are going to be talking and chatting all about Maui today. So let me bring in and introduce Nish and Vivek.
Hey everyone.
Vivek. Hi, Nish.
How are you? Trishal, it's good to see you on the show. It's a surprise for us. Right?
Absolutely.
It's a surprise for audience, Nish. I wanted to make sure we have surprises, and we are in the kitchen, so it's
Yeah, that's a lovely kitchen. That's a real kitchen, right?
By the way, I'm having my chai, and where is your samosas, guys? Where are your samosas?
tomorrow.
For us, the samosa right now is James doing the Maui session. That's our this, right? So
Awesome.
I mean, I've done this before, like having the chai here and spilled it all over. So I don't want to do that. So I didn't even carry the chai, any food here right now. So yeah, that's a way for now.
It's like you have seen Popeye show where he eats the
Yeah,
spinach
yeah.
and he gets the
Oh, that one.
power.
Yeah.
So before this show, I have samosas and then I come to the show so that we get the power to for the great session here.
That's a
Wow,
big
that's
lie. If
amazing.
someone eats samosa, they're going to sleep, not come to a show.
Yeah, yeah.
So, so,
So,
so
so
Nish,
Hmm.
I have a question to you.
Yeah.
So, how does a common developer become a Superman?
Oh my God. I have no idea. Do they wear a Superman shirt or something?
Like this, you have a GitHub.
Okay.
You need to have GitHub, and
Uh huh.
then
Yeah. What is that? Oh, that's a
wow,
C
I
sharp.
can see that.
We can't see
Okay,
it.
C sharp.
That's a C sharp T-shirt. Yeah, that's nice.
Okay.
Yeah.
right.
So Trishala, you may not know the reason. One of the reasons why we
Mm-hmm.
started the show is basically me teaching Vivek .NET and C Sharp. We went on
Mm-hmm.
talking about it a lot in the evenings, and we said like, okay, let's do a show, Samosa Chai, and then we started teaching Vivek. And the first thing we started doing was doing about microservices because something which he was very very familiar with. So we took an advanced topic and started speaking about microservices. And now look at that, he's already C Sharp bified, if I
Wow,
can say that word.
wow. Yeah, I was like wondering samosa, chai, and tech talks and tech
Mhm.
discussions. What's happening?
Yeah, that's all his idea, though.
Okay,
But
interesting history.
Yeah.
wonderful, wonderful. So, yeah,
Let's get started with the code of conduct. Um, Before we forget that,
Absolutely.
so this is a Microsoft Reactor session. So we are partnering with the teams here, Reactor Bangalore. And one of the important aspects here is to follow this code of conduct. So we just want to be very welcoming to everyone here, be aware of others, the different cultures. Even though the show is kind of like hosted for Indian audience, and that's where the name Samosa Chai. But we are streaming in all the platforms, so let's be nice to everyone. And yeah, that's the important message here with the code of conduct. Okay.
let's thank everyone here, right? So this show is kind of a watch party being delivered by the Azure developer community in how many cities, Nish? 60?
Yeah,
60
Hey,
plus
it's
cities?
100.
yeah.
Is it
100,
100?
right? 100.
So 100 was our aim. So Vivek worked really
Okay.
hard to get
Uh-huh.
100 cities, but we got managed to get about 60 cities here. And
Oh,
I
okay.
mean, I got to be honest with you, I did not know some of the cities like Satna and
Yeah,
Haldia.
I'm getting to pronounce them now, some of
Yeah,
them.
so these are the cities I didn't even know. I'm so
Amazing.
glad that we have developers from these cities. We would love to know about you. I mean, write in your comments which city are you joining in from, so we know that like where are you joining from. So this is really good to know about this.
Yeah, and maybe they can even write us some good comments, right? What are some of the things that they're, getting to learn from this show, or what are some of the cool things they love about this show?
Yeah,
We would
cool.
love to hear all the good things.
Right,
Let me
right.
go next.
So these are amazing communities. We have Indian Institute of Technology Madras joining us from the watch parties perspective, and also we have great student ambassadors from Microsoft Learn. They've been doing watch parties as well. And we also want to have a special thanks to Pune User Group, one of the oldest .NET communities in India, and they also have agreed to host this show. Sorry, in
Wow,
the host of watch party. Yeah, thank you so much,
amazing.
guys. This is amazing that you all signed up for this. And yeah, we saw Nepal. We're seeing London. That's amazing. We are seeing
We are seeing
Brazil.
Brazil as well.
Wow, I
Wow.
think this is the advantage of having this time zone, right? We're
Yeah,
able
yeah.
to get all these amazing folks joining in from Europe,
Oh, we have people from
Belgium.
Belgium. That's
Hey,
amazing.
everyone, welcome. Welcome to the show. Cool. Oh, we have someone from Florida too. I thought James was the only person who's joining from US.
Yeah, yeah. And I saw someone
We,
joining from Chennai. I wonder how the weather is.
Oh yeah. Okay.
India. Okay.
India.
great. So
We
so
have
let's
Denmark.
So basically, we're going to learn Maui today, and the agenda is very simple. So we're going to get started with Maui, and then next up, myself and Nish are going to, talk to you all about the building backend for that Maui, right? So
Mhm.
how to build a scalable backend to that Maui using Azure Container Apps, but it is not limited to that, right? So that we are going to anyways discuss that, and whatever James is going to teach us all today. It's been, put it as a learning material, as a learn path basically. So if you go to this samosachai.net, and there is a QR code, there is a 28 days uh, left for this challenge to complete from today. So it's around 7 modules, Nish, 7 to 8 modules,
Yep.
where you're going to learn end to end of Maui. So in a particular show like this, we can only teach a couple of things, and probably tomorrow we are going to do hands-on session as well, where you can also come in and build something from a mobile UI perspective. But that is all. Tomorrow and today we are anyways going to see how to do it end to end from a development perspective, right? So if you want to go in depth and get your hands dirty, right, this is amazing challenge, cloud skill challenge which we have launched. So you can go back and take up these learn modules and complete all those learn modules to get familiar with Maui and build some amazing mobile apps and multi-platform apps, and not just mobile apps. Right.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Let's move forward and bring in James. James been waiting.
Hey everyone, good evening. How's
Yes.
it going?
James,
Hey,
good to wake you
James.
up so
Good
much
morning.
so early in the morning.
Yeah, you're welcome. I did what's up? Nish this morning. I was like, I'm awake. Don't worry. I am here. It is happening. I think that's the important part. I told him I was like, I'm gonna wake up. And if I wake up, then we're good. So but I didn't make
Right.
I didn't make any chai. I did make some coffee. So I think it's too early for chai over here at least. I feel like the first time I went out to like an actual like authentic like Indian restaurant in Seattle when my first job in Seattle, we went out and it was one of those situations where I was like, oh, okay, get some chai, bring it over, and I swear I felt like the cup of chai never like had a dent in it, like it never went down ever because they were always just coming around and refilling it
Yeah,
so
refilling.
fast. It was
Uh-huh.
always at the brim.
Yeah.
So by the end, I think I drank so much chai that I was like, I don't want to drink any more chai for like a year. But I do love chai in general. Yes. But coffee this morning. I'm going to drink a lot of coffee. So I was up at like 4 o'clock. Not bad. Not bad. But I did go to bed early. But I'm excited because been looking forward to this. Nish, we've been planning it for like ever at this point since we've been
Forever,
talking
I
about
think.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, since when we started planning Maui, I guess. I don't know. It's been ever. We've been thinking about doing, specifically Indian audiences where we don't get to speak a lot in our time zones. So we're thinking, okay, we should do a lot more. And a nice shirt, by the way, James. So just tell us because we do not know what that shirt really means.
Hey, is he going for a vacation or something to a beach
Yeah.
after this session? Hey, James, we are like jealous about you now.
So that's what's kind of interesting about .NET Maui. Like obviously it is like one of those like shortened abbreviations, but a lot of times you'll see things with like a island type of theme or vacation holiday type of theme because in Hawaii there's a bunch of islands. So Hawaii is one of our states off the mainland, and one of the islands is Maui. So Maui is a very very popular destination. I don't know. It's not. I wouldn't say it's my favorite state or favorite island in Hawaii. They're all my favorite. I like Kona, which is the big island, a lot because it's very diverse weather-wise. Like you can be in the middle and it'll be like downpouring, but then you drive like 5 minutes, like super hot, and then it's just like really really cool. Maui's also beautiful, so they're all beautiful tropical islands. I like Kauai as well. They're all nice. So if people get to go out there, the Hawaiian Islands are super beautiful as well. But there's, think of it as just like another. If you're going to, I think if you're going to an island anywhere, you're in that vacation holiday mode. You got that island, it's an
Yeah.
island theme to it. So that's kind of what Don and I see. You often see a lot of that going on there.
Nice.
So So I got a few. I had a few of these shirts. I had all these shirts before we even put the name to .NET Maui. So this is just classic James apparel.
Nice.
Nice.
I had to basically make room because half of the wardrobe is just C# shirts, and then the other side is now just Hawaiian shirts. So
That's good. Yeah, it was my wardrobe for a long time working at Xamarin. Like a lot of C# shirts. Yeah,
and
nice.
We don't want to talk about, as developers, we don't want to talk about the wardrobe t-shirts which we have. It's like my wife is like, why do you bring all this stuff?
there's a
Developer.
series of developer shirts, and then I don't know. I like colorful, bright shirts for some reason. There's there, but Nish and I have worked together for was it like 11 years now, Nish?
Yeah,
10 years?
more than 10 years. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's impressive. Can't believe he puts up with me.
Interesting.
James. Okay, if the viewers didn't know, James is my manager as well. So it's a
Oh,
good
wow.
thing for me to wake him up at 5 a.m. and make him come up on the show, right?
It's easy.
I'm just a
as well.
person. I am a manager, but I'm just everyone. I just want to be your friend, Nish. That's all. So
It's fun.
Okay.
All right. So James, tell us what's Maui, and let's get started.
yeah, I'm ready. I got a whole presentation today. What I want to do, it's someone was asking in the chat. I saw here from LinkedIn. I know we're even streaming to LinkedIn. I didn't even know you could stream to LinkedIn. That's amazing. Tons of
That's
messages for
Vivek's
beginners. I'm gonna do the
yeah.
beginner session. It's kind of cool because I've been a .NET developer for. I was just thinking about this. I think it's been like 16 years. I think I started with .NET and C#. I think in 2005, 2006, like my first year in college. I was doing all C++, and I was a game developer. And then I learned C# and it just like blew my mind. It was like the coolest thing ever. And I was writing all sorts of amazing desktop applications. And then I actually went to, it's funny people are talking about Windows Phone, but literally that's what started my career. So like without Windows Phone, I wouldn't be here today. So thanks Windows Phone. Was a huge fan. Had one. Have some in a drawer over here as well. But I went to a conference in Washington on campus, a Microsoft campus, PDC, and it blew me away because we were talking about Microsoft Azure. It was Windows Azure at the time. They were launching the Windows Phone 7. They gave everybody this device that had all these like international chargers and all this other stuff. And it just was the coolest thing. I literally went back to my hotel room that night and I wrote my first mobile application. I had this supercomputer in my pocket. And it like blew my mind. And I quit my job. I was working at Canon, writing printer software. It was my first job out of college. I was, 20, I don't know, was like 24, 25. And I was like, whatever, just changing my stars. I'm like, I saw it, right? I think it's just like, I was like, oh my goodness, like this is it. Like, this is what I want to do with my life is I want to build mobile applications. And I moved to Seattle. I took a job at a small startup. And I was tasked with building an iOS, Android, Windows Phone, and Windows 8 application. And there was only thing out there that could do it, which was Xamarin and C# and .NET all together. And that's what I did. That's what I picked. That's what I chose. And I was the solo developer for 2 years, building all their mobile applications. We were building DVR, hardware, software, all this cool stuff. And then Nish asked me to join Xamarin. I said, yeah, Nish, I'm in. I'll join. Actually, I think when they sent me a job posting for developer advocate, I didn't even know what that was. I had no idea. I didn't even know it was. I was like, I'm a developer. I don't know. I thought it was an MVP program. I literally thought it was like an MVP program because I knew about Microsoft MVP, and I was like, cool, I'll be an MVP. And then they're like, cool, we'll set up the interview time, blah, blah, blah. Like, what days are you available? I was like, wait, what is going on? And then all of a sudden they flew me to San Francisco and I was sitting down with Nat Friedman, the founder, one of the founders of Xamarin. And I was like, I guess I'm joining Xamarin. And then now I'm here. Like that I don't know if you know that. And it's like, I had no idea that I was even applying for a job.
I knew they hired you, and we met. That's the only thing I know. I mean, I joined Xamarin. I think when Xamarin Forms, they were writing the first set of code. It was called Duplo.
Yep.
When Jason Smith was writing. So I flew to San Francisco, met Nat, spent there for 1 month, So I was hired for this role called developer evangelist because I was an evangelist for a previous company. And then I wrote to Nat on LinkedIn. I said, like, okay, I'm excited about this tooling because I got to explore it. And then Nat and I connected, and then he flew me to San Francisco, and that's how we started. But yeah, what James has been doing there, I was doing this side of the world. We built some communities here on Xamarin, like everywhere. I think in the APAC, we did it in India, Vietnam, Philippines, and many places inside and Southeast Asia. So this has been an amazing journey for us on in Xamarin, right? I mean, like I know the last evolve that we did, James and I. Okay, I don't know if you, Trishala and Vivek, know this. James and I, we did the keynote together with Nat, and we were actually fighting between coffee and chai. And so if you, yeah, I'm an avid chai drinker, and James is a coffee drinker. So we have the entire conversation there up in the keynote section of the Xamarin's YouTube. I guess it's still there. I don't
It's
know.
still
I
there.
haven't checked.
Yeah,
Okay.
I saved them. Yeah, you know why it's called
The-
Duplo, right?
Yeah.
The fight is still on. The fight is still on in Samosa Chai.
Forever. Well, I think I think there's like I think coffee culture around the globe is really transforming, and like I was recently watching a bunch of videos about coffee culture in India, and a lot of the beans coming out of India right now. A lot of people are doing a lot of blends with them over here, like doing unique things. I'm pretty interested to learn more about coffee culture. That's what Nish and I, when we do one-on-ones, we don't actually talk about work. We just talk about photography and Lightroom and how much it confuses me. So it's pretty much, I don't know. Nish is like an amazing everything, videographer, photographer, all this stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, it's like Instagram is just like, it blows me away. I was like, I don't even know what you're doing here. Because like I feel like you should be like,
I should follow you on Insta now to see some cool photography that you do. And of late, I got to know that Nish is also into cinematography.
Yeah, that was my recent pick, like because like we do technical
James,
videos, we get exposed to videos. Yep.
So James, let's get started with like basic, like I
Vivek's
saw a
ready.
couple of them.
Vivek's
Yeah,
like, stop talking, James. Let's do it. All right, fine.
Yeah, and I think people are getting restless. I see some serious questions which are like flowing in the comment section. So I think we should just get serious about the Maui now.
This is a serious side of things. All right, I'm ready over here. I can see whenever you bring up my desktop, and we'll be good to go.
All right. So Vivek and I will be hanging around. We'll be taking questions from everyone. So Trishala, we'll see you in a bit.
Yes. See ya.
So yeah.
Cool. Awesome.
Right,
all right, guys.
James.
Well, I have a solo monitor over here, but I have a whole nother computer over here that I'm going to be monitoring the chat and things on as well. So lots of good questions coming. I'll try to answer some of those as I go through. I try to naturally answer questions as well as we're going through stuff. But feel free, Vivek and Nish, to pop in if you're like, I need an answer right now. If it's like something that as I'm going through. But as everyone said, I'm James Montemagno. So I've been a long time .NET mobile developer, desktop developer, web developer, developing all the things with C#. And today I want to talk about the newest sort of next iteration, I would say, of cross-platform application development with .NET. And when we think about C#, we think about .NET. C# is a language we write every single day to build powerful applications. And underneath the hood, .NET is really what's powering all of that. So it's a runtime, it's a set of class libraries, it's infrastructure, it's compilers, it's components, it's those languages that we know and love. It's the ecosystem that we're all part of. It really enables us to build for any single platform, right? So if I'm a C# developer, I can build for cloud, web, desktop, mobile, gaming, IoT, AI. There's a great framework available for me to take advantage of and build great applications. Now, sometimes I can build like just a game, right? With Unity, for example, and I can write C# and it's powered by .NET. Or maybe I'm building like a powerful serverless Azure function and I'm writing that with C#. And sometimes what we want to do is write, a web app. And then we want to maybe share some common logic with that Azure function or with a desktop or mobile application. And the whole goal is that what .NET wants to be is run beautifully and natively on all these platforms. Now, I'm going to mostly focus on the desktop and mobile part because for me, this has been the thing that I've loved for decades. I've basically been all about building applications across desktop, mobile, and the other form factors that mobile comes up, which would be like tablets and things like that. So when we look at the landscape, today. We're targeting the vast majority of devices that users are using on the desktop with graphical user interfaces. We look to target Windows, Mac OS, iOS, and Android, and of course, iPad OS and Android tablets as well. So when we think about this, one thing that's already prevalent is that .NET runs on all of these different platforms. Obviously, you can build Windows applications with .NET, and there's a bunch of different UI frameworks. With Mac OS, .NET is part of the story there. Same with iOS and Android. .NET has an optimized runtime that runs on each of those platforms, and you can build in the specific UI framework that you would like on those things. If you want to use AppKit, UIKit, WinUI 3, you can use those on the different platforms because .NET is there. Now, when we want to build for these different platforms, we, of course, have the option of building independently based on our application. Maybe that's the right choice. Maybe I'm only building, let's say, the Microsoft Store application, what's only going to be on Windows, and I want to take advantage of every single bit of the Windows App SDK and WinUI 3 and like build a beautiful application right there. But often you might need to go to multiple platforms. You still want your applications to be beautiful and native and take advantage of those different features. And that's where .NET Maui comes in, the multi-platform app UI, which enables us to build and develop native applications from a single code base that perform great on all the great, amazing consumer devices out there today across Android, iOS, Mac, and Windows. Like I said, it's all from a single code base. I'm going to talk about that today. We're going to do a bunch of demos and get into some code. But what's really cool about .NET Maui is that it's actually an evolution if you've been a long time .NET developer using Xamarin or Xamarin Forms. It's sort of just the next version that's been sort of re-architected from the ground up, all on top of .NET 6, the latest iteration of .NET. So it's fully cross-platform. Now, what's really great about this, and we'll talk about it, is that there is actually an upgrade path for you to bring your existing Xamarin and Xamarin Forms applications to .NET Maui or to .NET 6. And there's great documentation on that. Now, when I mean it's part of .NET 6, what I mean is that it has a lot of distinct properties. One, that there's a unified .NET with .NET 6. In .NET 6, brings one base class library that's unified across all the different platforms. It also brings in a modern lifecycle support, SDK style projects, command line interface support, and a whole bunch more. It's going to support not only the mobile and desktop workloads for iOS, Android, Mac, and Windows. It also takes advantage of the latest Mac technology, Mac Catalyst, which is really popular. And additionally, you can build hybrid applications, which I'll talk about. So if you're a web developer today, stick around because I got some really cool stuff that helps you bring your existing web app to desktop and mobile with .NET Maui and Blazor. And even if you have a React app or an Angular app, you can bring it in as well, which is really cool. And additionally here, it's all about this productive development environment. So you get to take advantage of the latest and greatest. So with this, and what we'll see is that there is single project support that brings in a whole bunch of cross-platform goodies that really simplify development. It means you get to take advantage of .NET Hot Reload, XAML Hot Reload, and take advantage of the built-in dependency injection services and Microsoft extensions, and a whole lot more. So good questions in the chat. Like if you've been a long time Xamarin developer, what's the difference with .NET Maui? Well, it's a great question. Well, one, and we'll get to it, is that as an evolution, you get all of the goodness from Xamarin and Xamarin Forms, which is being able to build native cross-platform apps with C# and .NET. Now with Xamarin and Xamarin Forms, it's really focused on mobile though, just really on iOS and Android, where .NET Maui is focused on cross-platform desktop and mobile, and enabling hybrid scenarios to share application logic with the web. These are brand new things. I actually have a whole slide of what's new and what's not there. But being built on .NET 6, it means we get a unified base class library. So your code is expected to run exactly the same between those different projects. You get common SDK style support, CLI support, which means you get common infrastructure and GitHub Actions, Azure DevOps, or other CI/CD pipelines. .NET Maui ships with .NET, which means that when .NET updates, .NET Maui updates on this release cadence cycle. And at a core architecture level, .NET Maui is built from the ground up for performance with a brand new handler implementation for all of the controls. So there's a whole lot in there that's brand new for developers. And what that leads to is a more productive development environment, and faster and smaller applications for you. Now, what this looks like is the ability to build out a big shared code base. So this is your UI resources, your platform features, and your business logic. So for example, your business logic, these are things like your models, view models, RESTful service calls, your C#.NET code, right? This is just C# business logic. It's code that you're going to run. You're going to perform some math operations. Boom. You're going to access the file system. Boom. Anything that's inside of .NET, that is your business logic that can be shared across the different platforms. Now, you also offer up, obviously, cross-platform native UI. You can write UI in UIKit and AppKit and Android XML as well if you want to, but .NET Maui brings a full shared cross-platform UI framework into the mix. It also offers a bunch of cross-platform resources that I'll talk about, like app icons, splash screens, fonts, images, translation files, styles, and a bunch more. And additionally, built directly into .NET Maui is access to over 70 native platform features, such as connectivity, device sensors, and a lot more. You can start developing today with Visual Studio 2022. You can use the current stable version on Windows, Visual Studio 2022 version 17.3. So that is the version number, if you will. And then over on the Mac, you have Visual Studio for Mac. Currently, you'll need the preview of Visual Studio for Mac over there. So that's going to be Visual Studio 2022 for Mac version 17.4 preview 1. So that's the current version. You can check .NET Maui and check the iOS and Android workloads, and you'll be good to go and do all this stuff there. And what's great is that the same project, same solutions are going to open between the different IDEs that are all there as well. Cool. Now, the thing that I love about .NET Maui is that it's going to look familiar if you're coming from an existing C# background. Even if you're coming from ASP.NET Core, there's a lot of similarities of how the application is structured in the startup code. But what it also means is that it's been restructured in a way that's brand new, that takes advantage of the latest technologies, but also developer productivity, and specifically with single projects. So when I create a new project, I get one project that lets me to deploy to multiple platform targets. And I'm going to show what this looks like in a demo, but when you do file new, you're going to get this, out of the box application that's themed and styled for cross-platform development, for light theme and dark theme and everything like that. And I'll talk about, after we kind of get into a little bit of code, of what this actually means to be native and the performance gains that we get and how we can access native UI as well. So let's first go in and take a look over here. So I'm going to go in, and the first thing that you'll need to do is install Visual Studio 2022. So I'm going to do my demos here on Windows, but of course you can apply the same thing to Mac as well. Now I'm running the preview. I only run a preview. That's how I do it. Why live any other life? I always live on the edge, I say. You can actually install the current preview side-by-side stable. So if you want to run stable, you can do it there. When you open up Visual Studio stable or preview, and you check right here, this .NET Maui app development, that's all you need. Just one checkbox, you're good to go. If you want to do other stuff like me, I do web development, Azure development, Windows, C++ development. I do a little bit of everything. So I like to check all the boxes in there too. You can, do Unity development, do a bunch of stuff. You can do all the stuff. So that's all you need. Then when you do and open up Visual Studio 2022, what you're going to get is the ability to create a new project. And inside of here, what we're going to see is a bunch of different templates. So if I zoom in here, let's see if that's going to zoom. Maybe not today. There we go. There we go. Perfect. So over here, put my magnifier over there. You have all these different templates. So if you just go like this, you'll see all the stuff that you installed. Visual Studio can build basically anything. There's all the things. To make it really easy, there's a Maui dropdown, and there's 3 different project templates here. The first one is the .NET Maui application built with native UI, with XAML or C#. And this is our hybrid app that we'll talk about later on. And then just a class library. So I'm just going to go and double tap on the file new over here. And I'm going to create a Maui app 19. That's a good name. And here we can see I'm just selecting .NET 6 as my target. I'm going to hit create. And this is going to create my .NET Maui application over here. And this is going to give me that common single project that we saw earlier, coming from from the template. So let me go ahead and make this a little bit bigger over here. I'm going to zoom in because I think this is pretty cool, is what we get out of the box is a .NET Maui application that targets Android, iOS, Mac, and Windows. You can see there's little warning buttons here because right now all the dependencies, the NuGet packages, those are all coming in and lighting up for me as I start to create it. When my project's ready, those will go away. Now, what's also great here is that I have a bunch of other resources in here. So .NET Maui will automatically take care of the cross-platform stuff that I don't want to have or need to worry about. So for example, things like app icons, I can put them in these resource folders, fonts, cross-platform fonts if your designer has fonts you want to use, images. So here we have an SVG file. What's cool is that .NET Maui, when you give it app icon or splash screen configurations, you can give them PNG or JPEGs or SVGs, and the SVGs will automatically be resized and scaled for the different densities for the different platforms automatically. We have splash screens in here, raw assets like text files, JSONs, or database files, and then, of course, styles as well. So here there's a default set of colors, for example, and that will enable you to restyle your application with just a few lines of code. And then also over here is styles.xaml. So inside of here, this is a default style sheet, if you will, for every single thing, kind of bootstrap for your application as well, which is cool. Now, at the end of the day, what we're going to be doing is sort of loading our application in this main program file. And what's cool here is that this is a host builder pattern. So this is coming from ASP.NET Core. So if you're coming from that world, it's going to look familiar. We have use Maui app. We have configure fonts. You can add lifecycle events here and a lot more. And you can also register things for dependency injection and IOC and all that good stuff. We can see that it's using a Maui app, which is quite cool. And this Maui app over here is the startup code that says start up our code into our app shell. Every app has a series of windows associated with it. So this creates one window, and our app shell enables us to do things like fly out navigation with the things that fly out from the left and right. And then over on or tabs on the top and on the bottom. And then at this instance here, it's going to create a single page. And the single page is a series of controls and views for my application. So here I have a scroll view, I have an image, I have a label, I have a button down here, and they have different events. They have accessibility property, like these semantic properties, level headings, click events, and a lot more. Now, this button, for example, is an actual button. So we'll talk about how this is native and different from other cross-platform frameworks. But when we create a button, this is a .NET Maui button. But when it's rendered on the page, this is going to be an actual native control that can be a WinUI 3 control, a control for Android, or a UIKit control as well on iOS. So you get these different capabilities built right in. So I just went up into the debug menu, Windows was selected, and I hit debug, and it's going to compile up my native Windows application here and start debugging. So here we go. I'm actually over here. If I look here, we can see that I have my application. I can click over here and increase it to 10. Now I'm on a single display and monitor, so I can actually bring up this XAML live preview if I wanted. This is new. This is pretty cool. I get a live preview of my application. I can actually hover over different elements. I can tap on it, and actually it'll jump me to that source code. I also have the ability to add like grid lines in here, so I can actually like do some design work, which is quite nice. I can go into this live visual tree as well, which gives me a representation of all the different controls. You can see the actual XAML live previewer lights up. So it actually helped me jump around in my code if I have a lot of controls in there as well, which is kind of cool. Now, I can also say, hello, Samosa chai.net. And we can see that my application is updating in real time over here with XAML hot reload. I didn't even have to save this file. If I open the actual application, you can see that the application is updated in real time. So I'm just making modifications to my code. It updates in real time, and we're good to go. Now, the same thing is true if I look at the code behind. If I come over here and I add a breakpoint, for example, and I interact with the app, I get a breakpoint. I have all the power of Visual Studio to inspect my elements. I have locals. I have watch windows. I have diagnostic views, or I have performance metrics here on Windows, memory, CPU usage, all this stuff. I can take advantage of all this stuff that's coming in. Now, I can also take a look at the native controls that are on here. I can take a look at every single property that's coming in, the fonts that are being used, and then, of course, I can continue on. And we can see that it increased there. And, of course, in my live preview. The other thing I can do is I can just make code modifications, and I can hit this little hot reload button for my C# code. I can also say hot reload on file save. And when I do that, it's now going to increase by 10 every single time I tap on it. So you can actually see that right there is I'm not only modifying my XAML, but I'm also modifying my C# code in real time. So for example, if I wanted to come in to here and add another button, say, let's say text, and say hello everyone, or let's say hello, hello everyone. And let's just add it in there so we see it. Cool. Let's do horizontal option center. And then let's do a clicked event. I'm just going to have it add a new click handler for me. There we go. So it's going to generate some code for me automatically. Then we should see it go away because it's been generated. And then down here, I have this button click. So I could do something like display alert. There's alerts and there's action sheets. There's different things built into .NET Maui. So I could say hello, and then I'll say world. And then I could do OK. There we go. I'm going to display a little alert. I'm going to hit hot reload here, open up the app. And sure enough, look at that. We get our hello world right here. And a native WinUI 3 button because it's built on native controls. So I get that native look and feel at the end of the day. So I never had to stop coding, do that stuff there. Now, I've gone in and I've just created this all in XAML because I like XAML. You can also create things in C#. So if you don't want to do XAML, you can do it in C# too, or F#. It's all up to you. Now, what's cool here is that I just started writing some code and it worked. And if I actually open the project file, this is another one of my favorite things, is that we can see up here that I'm actually multi-targeting. So here I'm targeting Android, iOS, Mac, and if I'm on Windows, also Windows as well. So if I just go over, we have Windows here too. It also supports Samsung Tizen, which is pretty cool. So if you want to develop for Samsung devices for Tizen, you can do that. But what's great is that when we talk about cross-platform, multi-platform stuff, it's not just about the UI, it's about the other stuff to help developers' lives be easier to develop for. So things like cross-platform application titles, application identifiers, version codes, so you can easily bump those things inside of your CI and CD. This is really cool. Supported in target platforms. This enables you to, on each platform, decide how far back and how far forward you want to support each platform. So here I'm saying on Android, support all the way back to Android 21 and iOS 14.2, for example, which is cool. And then we have all these resources. So your app icon, where you specify your files, your splash screen, your images, where you can specify base sizes and really fine-grained control your fonts and your raw assets as well. Now, what's great here is that since it does support many platforms, there is ability to access platform code. So inside of here, we have a little bit of Android and iOS code, all inside of C#, and I'll talk about how this works. But inside of Windows, for example, I have manifest files and app startup code, and it's using the WinUI code that's inside of here, and I can access stuff if I want to, which means that I can also deploy to multiple targets. So if I go up here, I can see in my dropdown for debug, I can actually specify where I want to deploy. So on Windows, I'm on Windows, I can deploy to Windows. On Android, I'm going to switch to Android, and I have an Android emulator here. Now, I can plug in a physical Android device if I want to and put that in developer mode. That's pretty cool. Of course, that'll just deploy normally to my Android device, or I can also bring up Android emulators. So here's an Android emulator. I'm on Windows 10 right now, so I just have emulators available to me. In some countries, I know there's people tuning in from around the world, the Windows subsystem for Android is available, and I know a few more countries are getting it. That enables you to build and deploy Android apps directly on Windows 11, which is really cool. But for any way, you can get access to emulators or devices as well. Now, this is going to now build up my Android application. Now, this is going to take a little bit longer than Windows because it's actually going through a native Android compilation. And of course, I'm live streaming. I got an emulator open. I got all this stuff open. A whole bunch of things are happening. So it might take even a little bit longer for us right now. But as we can see, there's things moving on the screen, which is always a good sign, as Nish knows, that when things are moving, that means things are happening. But it's actually compiling up a native Android package right here. It's signing the package, it's getting the package ready, it's found the emulator for me, it starts the emulator if it's not started, has all this stuff for me, and it actually starts a debug session right here inside of my application. So here we go. We have the same exact application, Hello Samosa Chai. It's wrapped because it's on a smaller screen. I can click and increase the count. I get the same stuff here. So here's my my screen. I have this set to always on top, which is a great setting, unless you want to show off a feature that makes it so it's not on top. So you can see it here, right? You get that live visual tree. So you get the same stuff, right? Which is really, really cool. I can hit hello, everyone. And now we're getting a Android button because it's an Android application, right? So I get that native integration. Now, what's cool here is that it also enables me to deploy if I want to iOS or Mac. Now, for Mac, you have to be on a Mac. You can actually do some packaging and you can do some things there. For iOS development, let me make it clear. For Mac application development, you got to have a Mac, just like on Windows, you got to have Windows. Android can be done Mac or Windows. iOS is unique. So there's a few different ways to do development. One is to go to your Mac and just install Xcode and do things there and develop. The other way is to connect to a Mac. We actually have this pair to a Mac, and you can pair to your Mac over the network. It'll do a remote build compilation package, and there's a remote iOS simulator. The other thing that you can do is if you have an Apple developer account, you can tell this to actually deploy to a local device. So I've taken my iPhone that's down here, and I'm going to deploy it here to my iPhone.
I'm interested, James.
Yes.
That's a good one.
So this is going to set up hot restart, which is a feature to deploy to a local iOS device. So I've signed in with my developer account. It's going to install anything that I need, which is nice. And now what this is going to do is it's going to sort of take our code and put it into a predefined package that's only for debug purposes. Okay. This isn't going to let you like deploy it to the App Store, things like that, but it's going to package up my application and then deploy it directly onto my iOS device in a debug state. So this covers, maybe like 80% of the use cases. There's certain device capabilities you want to have access to because it's a app inside of an app, if you will. And this is a newer piece of technology that came out in the very late stages before .NET Maui and things like that. Okay, cool. So I have my application. I'm going to go ahead and launch it on my phone. And that's how it registers it here. And it's booting up. There we go. And it's going to go into a debug state for me. This should boot up. Cool. So I actually see it on my screen, but you can see it on this screen right here with Xamarin Live Preview. So this is literally my phone.
Wow.
Cool. Yep. And I can click and I can see it increase over here. I can say, hello world. I get a native iOS pop-up. This is pretty cool. Over there. I can
This is amazing.
Breakpoints. Yeah.
I saw this internal demo and I was excited. I wanted to try it out, but watching you do it again, I was like, wow, this is something which I should now try it out and figure it out how this needs to be done.
So most of the time, I would say most of the time I deploy and I debug, I have my phone in dark mode, obviously here. So you can see the theme change. Most of the time I just go to my Mac and do it. just because if I don't want to always plug in my device and do stuff, and simulators are pretty quick. To build up a full package, right? But this is really nice when I'm just on the road with my machine. I can plug in my iOS device and go. Now, you do need an Apple developer account, though. I'm pretty sure you need a paid one as well. So be aware of that. There's a lot of restrictions on iOS and building and compiling, but if you have one, you're good to go. And a lot of good questions about Android. So my iPhone is plugged in through USB cable. So just plugged in normally. I think you just have to have iTunes installed, and that's pretty much it. And you log in there. So it's plugged into USB. For Android, anything that you can do with Android for debugging, maybe from Android Studio, you can do as well. So if you have, you can connect via an IP address, it shows up in the thing. That totally works as well. Everything is supported, basically. Yeah. So pretty cool. This is pretty neato, and it's cool that it just kind of lights up, and you get these exact same features as well. Like as we hover over, right, it goes to the different elements. You get the different styles. It's really cool. You get the same exact functionality and features across the board, which is cool. So you get the hot reload, right? You see that says hello from iOS, which is quite cool. And then you get that awesome stuff too. So that is pretty astonishing in general. Just the developer productivity built in there is really, really cool right out of the gate for developers. And now if I wanted to, I could go to my Mac, boot up the Mac application as well, and go from there. But let's talk about some of the other features that I think are really cool, which is the nativeness. These platform experiences are the best. I kind of showed File New, some of the things that I love about the developer landscape. But to me, when we talk about native and when we're building native applications, the difference here is that, we're building things with native controls, native libraries, native APIs, native frameworks at the end of the day. So for us, that means using native control widgets and UI kits and the latest technologies like Mac Catalyst, which bundles up iOS applications into native Mac applications with cool features and functionalities. And of course, using the latest Windows App SDK and WinUI 3, which means you get advantage of all of that native stuff automatically and the native APIs, but all from C#. It also means it goes through native compilation. So for example, on iOS and Android, there's native ahead of time compilation that basically produces native machine source code and ARM binaries for the different platforms that you can publish to your device, to the App Store, internally to your App Store as well. Now, this is part of .NET and part of .NET 6. So when you're building on the latest generation of not only the UI technology stack with .NET Maui, but also .NET itself, which leads to really great perf gains across the board. Now, performance is in the eye of the beholder, because what does that even mean? Does it mean that I can number crunch faster? Does it mean that I can hold up a frame rate? Does it mean that I can start in under a certain amount of time? Does it mean I can spin a ball? So, you know what I mean? It really just depends on what you're thinking. Can I scroll really fast? What does it mean to you? Well, for a lot of developers, it means how long does it take to start up my application? And if you're coming from Xamarin Android or Xamarin Forms, and you upgrade and modernize your application with .NET Maui, which we have great wiki articles and documentation on how to do that as well. So check that out on docs.microsoft.com. And I'll talk about that here in a second. You get better performance. So here are the same exact applications, file new project going through, and what is the startup time that's there. So for just an Android app with Android UI, we're looking at nearly 70% faster. So going from 300 millisecond startup to under 200. And then Xamarin Forms versus .NET Maui, nearly 50% faster. So Xamarin Forms, the startup time was around 800 milliseconds. Now we're under about 550 milliseconds, so half a second. So really, really quick as far as the startup time for the application. Now, there's a lot of stuff in the box, but there's a lot of things that are new as well. So a lot of things are going to look somewhat familiar. So we have things like XAML and MVVM, different platforms, different UI features. We also get a backwards compatibility layer with Xamarin Forms. We get community toolkits. We get a bunch of new capabilities. So there's cross-platform graphics API with a full canvas available, borders, shadows, menu bars, themes, all those, everything cross-platform, app icons, fonts, images. And there's a bunch of new changes from Xamarin as well. So built from the ground up, you get more namespaces, more compilation, more lifecycle events. It's part of .NET and the workloads, and a few new defaults as well. That means you get all sorts of great controls available to you. So over 50 controls, layouts, and views built into the box, and a lot more, of course, as well. And how this works, what we saw, right, is that each platform, right, how do we get these cross-platform things? Well, each platform has a native control. It's like a UI activity indicator or progress bar. And what .NET Maui gives you is an activity indicator, or things like sliders and seek bars, you get a slider. So what the .NET Maui team did, and what other community members do, is they build these custom handlers for each control to give you access to a cross-platform API. So that's really what we're accessing at the end of the day. Now, on top of that, there's a bunch of cool new things like multi-window support. Windows is called Windows because there's Windows. And then, of course, you've iPad apps that are on big iPads that you want to span across multiple windows. So you have access to multi-window support directly in .NET Maui, which is really awesome. It's really easy to open up. They all have their own lifecycle event as well. Now, another cool thing is that I've been talking about cross-platform APIs like .NET and the UI layer, but you can always get down to the native APIs as well. The Siri kit, AR kit, UI kit, map kit, those are available in C# through C# bindings. Same thing true for Android. So things like geolocation, picture-in-picture, Bluetooth, fingerprint, there's a whole bunch in there, which are nice. So for example, if there's an API you want to use that's from Android, you can use it. In fact, I just had someone tweet at me a video of them doing Bluetooth printing to a little printer, like a little receipt. If you go to the store and buy something, printing out a receipt from a .NET Maui application, tapping in to those Android printer and Bluetooth APIs. It's cool. It's all available in C# and available to me there too. But built in to .NET Maui itself are a bunch of cross-platform API features, things like clipboard, device sensors, and network notifications, a whole lot more. It's over 70 of them built in to give you access to native API features. So for example, app actions, like when you long press or right click on things on the desktop, you get access to those through a very simple API called set async, and you can get access to those immediately. Things like geolocation, you can get access to those in just a few lines of code. You can get last known location or query immediately. And of course, what's nice about all these built-in APIs is they're also unit testable and injectable with dependency injection and interfaces. So everything has an interface. You can use built-in dependency injection and inversion control. So if you've been a long-time .NET developer, you'll be good to go and you'll love it. So for example, if I want to access and integrate in, let's say, some platform features, I can go to the documentation over here, and I could go down to platform integration. And we can see here on the overview page, we can see all the different stuff that I can go ahead and integrate. So things like application models gives me app action, app info, launcher, maps, permissions. I have email, networking, phone dialer, web authentication, battery information, flashlight, vibration, media picker, screenshots, text-to-speech, clipboard access, sharing files and text, file pickers, preferences, secure storage, and a whole lot more. So I can go into that application over here, and I could, if I wanted to, come into the Android source code, and I could go in and say using Android dot, and I have access to all the different namespaces, and I could access and write code there. But let's say I wanted to access the internet. I could come over into my application over here, and let's just check for the internet. So instead of saying hello world, I could say bar has internet. I'll say Maui, Microsoft.maui.networking. And I have access to all of the networking APIs like connectivity built right in. And then I have access to things like if connectivity is changed, the connection profiles, the network access, and a lot more. So I could go in and I can say connectivity.current.network access, and I can see if it equals over here internet. So there's a bunch of different internet types, and if it has internet, we have internet. So here I'll say has internet. question mark. Over here, I'll compile up and I'll do a has internet here, just like that. Now I'm going to go redeploy this, let's say over to Android, for example, and go ahead and debug this again. So I use that same button click, add one line of code in my application, right? And then I'm just going to do a quick check to see if the network access is equal to internet. I could also check to see if it has Wi-Fi or if it has, cellular or something like that. But it's going to do that. Here we go. So it's going to now deploy our application. You see the second iteration of when I debug, it's a lot faster because we're just doing a diff, which is nice. Now we're going to say not hello from iOS. We'll say check internet. There we go. Check internet. Tap on it. And it totally has internet, which is great. I could come in over here and put it in airplane mode. Now, when I check internet, totally does not have internet, right? So it's looping into those native APIs at the end of the day, which is also really, really nice. I'm realizing now that when I zoom, it doesn't actually zoom in StreamYard. That's really funny.
Yeah, I was about to say that. Yep.
Yeah. No, so I no longer have to zoom. I bet if I use zoom it, I don't. How do I have it? It's been a while. Oh,
yeah,
that works. But now I can't interact with it. So anyways, you get the idea. Cool. So anyways, super quick, right? Just accessing native features. Just boom, built right into the box, which is super duper cool. All right. How am I doing? Doing good on time. Cool. Oh, there's the same application running on Mac, iOS. You saw it running. It's cool. All right. Now, what's great here is that there's actually a vast ecosystem, right? What I showed you is just stuff in the box, right? File new, playing around, some APIs. Cool, James. Awesome. That's rad. What else is out there? Well, there's a vast amount of controls, components, plugins, libraries, and so much more that you can take advantage of. Many of these are coming from and being updated to .NET 6 and .NET Maui from Xamarin and Xamarin Forms. So things like the Facebook SDK or Android X, or things such as the Microsoft Authentication Library. Those have access now to .NET Maui, but amazing UI controls from Telerik, Sync Fusion, DevExpress, UX Divers, and a whole lot more. I have a few libraries on here like in-app billing and the store review plugin. So in-app billing lets you take money, make money off your application. That's pretty rad. I do that myself. There's fingerprint, there's gesture support, there's cross-platform graphics, and a whole lot more. And it's been really cool to see what people build. So there's all sorts of really cool libraries like this one from Javier, who lets you do all sorts of cool circular different forms and panes and stacks and things like that. It's called Maui Pane. There's experimental MVU style coding, code first with Comet, which is a cool project. JetBrains is adding support for .NET Maui and Rider, which is really awesome to see. People are building games like Sean over here, building real-time games, space games with his application. People cloning UI like Outlook, like Wordle, for example. We have a UI challenge going on. So people are building these really beautiful UIs with .NET Maui with all sorts of different cool different application types, calculators, all these really cool things. It's really cool to see in just a small amount of time the things that developers are able to build and scaffold out with .NET Maui. So really awesome examples. And one example that we have is the .NET Maui Podcast App. And I think Nish and Vivek are going to talk about it a little bit as well, which is a podcast application built with .NET Maui that takes advantage of a bunch of native capabilities and theming and styling and runs across different platforms. So if I open up that project, you'll see that it's a big application over here with a whole bunch of different files in there as well. So a bunch of pages and views and view models and a bunch of stuff, MVVM goodness, all sorts of goodness in here. So many pages, things in here that are really cool. And in fact, if you go to the podcast, it's open source on the Microsoft GitHub, and you can look at it. It's powered, this is the full app. It's powered by Azure Container Apps and Azure Kubernetes environments. Signal R for listen together mode. There's a Blazor web app, Azure SQL storage, and a bunch more. And you can just download it and run it immediately, which is really cool. And let me go ahead and open it over here. So I'm just going to go ahead and open it on my Windows device and over here on Android as well. So we get .NET Podcast, we get our splash screen, and over here we get our Windows app, we get our Android application. I can go and I can tap on, podcasts. I can subscribe to them, which is pretty cool. I can go ahead and listen to podcasts. I can subscribe. I can listen later to them, which I think is pretty awesome. There's a whole listen together mode. You can, style it in light theme, dark theme modes independently, which I think is really fantastic. So here we can go ahead and say, I'm going to listen to this later, for example. Look at my subscriptions. I can subscribe. So we get this, this beautiful UI that's inside of here. I can look at my categories that are coming in, should be coming in from the internet. There we go. And sort of see the different styling that's coming in at the end of the day, which is really cool. So kind of like looking at a fully, native application, playing back audio over here. So if I play a podcast, I have no internet. So that's cool. It's all cached. Offline mode. Amazing. That's really cool. So it says like a native player integration. So you can see that it's like up here playing back my audio through my speakers, which is cool. And it's all linked in, tied in there, which is really, really nice as well, which is cool. So on top of that, though, not only can you build things, this is a great reference sample application for you to like get access and start playing around with applications today, is that all these things are available out there, right? There's all these great samples, there's all sorts of stuff. And here's the URL for the podcast application to kind of see it all in action at the end of the day. Now, I have one last thing before I get out of here and take some more questions that are things are brewing here. Is what if I'm a web developer, right? And I want to take my web assets and build something hybrid. This is a very common pattern for developers and for web apps and for native apps and for desktop apps. Sometimes it's an entire application that is hybrid and it has basically a shell around it. And sometimes there is applications that have a little bit of hybrid application, a little bit of web technology. And with .NET Maui and Blazor, you can do that. So Blazor is our full stack framework for building web apps with .NET. It enables you to build in 3 modes. In a Blazor server mode, it's component-based model, and where you take advantage of server and server shadowing of DOM. It handles updates and enables you to build everything in C# instead of JavaScript. You can also run things in WebAssembly mode, which is really cool to run things in the web browser disconnected in an offline state. So you can also do that as well, which is great. WebAssembly is an open standard. But Blazor is really cool because it lets you build those great web apps or even progressive web apps for your desktop. And of course, .NET Maui lets you build those great native applications. But the thing is that these teams work together because it's one .NET at the end of the day. And those teams came together, and the Blazor team developed a piece of technology called Blazor Hybrid that works with multiple .NET UI frameworks, including .NET Maui. And what this means is that we can actually reuse existing web technology and build and mix and match native UI and web UI together. You can seamlessly ship this to the App Store and do all sorts of really cool things, but still access all of those native device capabilities. So this means that you can actually build this hybrid technology based on what type of app you need to build and what your background is. So you can not only build and ship a web app, a Blazor web app, you can also ship that same exact shared UI component in a .NET Maui application and take advantage of the native .NET Maui capabilities that I just showed you. So let me show you what that looks like really quick. So I'm going to open another project over here. Let me go ahead and minimize these here. Perfect. And before we created a .NET Maui project, but I'm going to create a .NET Maui Blazor application. This is a hybrid application powered by Blazor that enables me to use web UI directly in my .NET Maui application and take advantage of all the Razor and all the Blazor ecosystem as well, which is really, really cool. So let me go ahead and have this open up here. There we go. Now, this is going to look pretty much identical to what we had before, but what we're going to see is that, how do I do this? It's been a while since how do I I need a Hanselman it. I totally forget how to draw arrows in it. But anyways, we get things like platform folders, resource folders. We get all the same startup code that we would expect. But when I tap on the Maui program, we're going to see that I also get this Maui Blazor web view. Now I have access to all those resources, but I also inside my pages have a Razor syntax and right here. So I have Razor for button clicks and increase the counter that are here. And that enables me to create my .NET Maui pages and put in Blazor web view controls. So you can have as many Blazor web view controls as you want here. So this is really cool. This is hosting web content. So that can be anything. It can be Blazor. It can be it has Bootstrap out of the box, but it could be Tailwind. It could be anything you want. It could be a React component. It could be pretty much anything. But if I boot this up over on my Windows machine, what we're going to see is that I have a full .NET Maui Windows WinUI 3 application, but using web UI and controls for my user interface. It's still hosted in a native application, but I am able to, still access the underlying capabilities at the end of the day. So if I boot this up, I'm going to take advantage of all the same stuff before. We get the XAML live preview, right? We get that whole thing that's there. I have my web view here. This is using the underlying native web view. So web view 2, Android web view that's there. And then you can click and you can fetch data and you can do all this stuff. So, right, based on what you need, it's totally there, right? And this is great because if you are a web developer and you want to build native applications, you can do that and you can mix and match different UI. Like you can have a little bit of native UI and a little bit of web UI, right? You can ship those features faster. You can still come in here, for example, if I come into my counter, let's say I added another button here, it said, check internet, it said check internet there. I went ahead and did this increment count and I said, check internet. I could still come in. I could come in and say var has internet equals connectivity dot current dot network access. I check to see if that equals internet. And then I could say app.current.main page.display alert. And I'll say internet ? And then I'll say has internet, just like we did before. Okay. Hit that there. Hit save. This should hot reload. Check internet. Boom. Totally has internet. Bop, 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 right? So you still have access to those native capabilities. If you want to, you can go into the platform folders, right? It's all available to you. Like there's no sandbox, right? You can mix and match these things, which is really cool. In fact, you can mix and match them so much that if I go over to my podcast application and I go over here and I look at the running application, this is an ASP.NET Core page, and I have a Blazor application. So it looks very, very similar. I can actually tap on an episode over here. I can start playing back that episode. And what's cool is that I could go into this listen together mode. And I'm going to say James. I'll say James on Blazor. I'm going to open that room. And now I have this Blazor application. Now I can go over here, right? I can actually pin this and I could open a new tab and I could paste this in here and I could, go like this. I have two browsers open and I could say, James on Blazor 2, hit join room. Now I have James on Blazor 2 and we're listening to the podcast together and I can send little emojis as we're doing this. But I could also go into my podcast app and I could go into listen together and I could then copy this code, put this here, join this room. I'll say James on Windows, hit join room. And now I'm inside of a .NET Maui application, right? This is all native UI over here, but this single view is a Blazor web view. This is actually powered by Blazor and SignalR. And I can actually send these emojis across the wire, right? Which is really cool. I can come into Android. I can do the same thing. I can go into my listen together mode over here. I can add my room code over here, which is cool. join the room as well. James on Android. Join room. And now over here, Nish is here. Nish can send emojis and we can be listening to a podcast together. I can start and stop audio playback, right? I'm getting all of these things as I would expect, which is really, really cool. Now, that to me is kind of mind-boggling awesome, which is really, really cool. But what if I also told you that I was able to add that into my Listen Together page as a simple Blazor web control? That entire component was shared between my desktop application and my mobile application and my web application at the end of the day. Now, you might be saying, well, wow, James, this is really cool because I have all this native UI and all these native things and it's looking amazing. But what if I'm just a Blazor developer? And what if I don't want to write any native controls and I still want to take this web app and bring it in? You can do that too. Check this out. I have another version of the app that's in that repo right there. That's called the .NET Maui Blazor podcast application. And here in my main page, I actually have the entire .NET Maui podcast application from Blazor. And I actually have it here on my desktop. I'm going to boot it up. And this application is 100% Blazor. This is a Blazor application. It resizes with CSS styling. I can tap on a podcast, subscribe, listen together, look at my subscriptions. I can do all the things that I would expect. Light theme, dark theme, all those things. I can style it exactly how I want it across the board. I can take the entire application. Now, what's cool here, though, is that this application, when I play back a file, if I look over here, I can actually show you that wow, over here, we have the entire podcast app. It's sharing the components and pages from the web app. But then down here, we actually have a separate library for all the media audio playback. And this is native code, right? So instead of using a web control or a web JavaScript library to do audio playback, I am using native Android, iOS, Mac, and Windows code to do audio playback so my users get the best experience at the end of the day. Whew, amazing. So the choices are yours, right? You can choose if you just need to build a web app with Blazor, create a site, a PWA, you're good to go. You're going to go fully native and get the power over here. You got .NET Maui with XAML and C#, and you're good to go. Or you can sit in the middle here, right? And you can use Blazor and .NET Maui together in this hybrid mode, and you get the best of all worlds based on what you need to build, whatever type of developer you are. I'm not going to tell you what to develop. I'm going to tell you whatever makes you super productive, makes you happy at the end of the day, and that's what it's about. Now, .NET Maui is built into .NET, which means as part of the .NET 7, .NET 8, .NET 9 roadmap, because .NET releases every single year. What's cool about that is that in .NET 7, they're featured and focused even deeper in desktop application development, adding context menu, cursors, hover, tooltips, right-click gestures, and a lot more. They're adding maps, controls as well, and a whole bunch more. So definitely check out the roadmap for .NET Maui. And additionally, since it is part of .NET, there is a new major version of .NET Maui every single year. So when's the next version? The next version is going to be in November, and then November 2023, November 2024, right? It's going to be all of those back to back to back, which is pretty awesome. Now, .NET Maui also, as an optional workload in .NET, means it can update out of band if it needs to. So for example, since there's dependencies with Xcode and Android SDKs, how do we make sure that, hey, if I'm on .NET 7, I don't have to wait till .NET 8 to get those updates, right? If iOS, Xcode 15 comes out or 16 or the next versions. Well, even though .NET Maui will ship, there will be basically 18 months of patches. So you have an additional 6 months after .NET 8 ships that will add the patches to support new versions of iOS and Android and Mac and Windows as well. So it's something that's pretty unique for .NET Maui. So as you can, upgrade as well to the latest versions of .NET, if you need to take advantage of those newer versions, you can still get those without having to update to the latest things there. Now, if you're still on Xamarin and Xamarin Forms, you still have until May of 2024. That's the end of support lifecycle. Of course, your apps will still work, but you'll still receive support up until that time. You can get started at .NET.NET/Maui, download Visual Studio, and you'll be off to the races building all the cool stuff that's here. And that is totally it 1 hour.
Awesome.
There you go.
As always, great demo, James.
It was like watching an intense movie. Like for 1 hour, I'm watching intense movie. Like so many things happening, and so many amazing stuff. Uh, yeah, I myself tried couple of things a week before, which is really cool. And people who are here, if you want to try it out, there is Cloud Skill Challenge which we are running, so you can also go back and try it out. But where do we start, Nish? Where do we start with questions? I mean,
Yeah, there are
it's
so many
like
questions. I try to answer a few, and I try to bring up those questions in between when you are answering those relevant specific stuff. So I think this is James. Can we develop Maui apps using Visual Studio for Mac? Absolutely, right?
Yeah. I had basically a screenshot of Visual Studio for Mac, and yeah, you install Visual Studio 2022 for Mac, the preview. So just Google that, and that'll come right up. And that's what you'll need today. Just tap the .NET Maui button. I think you also need to tap iOS and Android and things like that currently. So that'll be there. That you need to install the Xamarin stuff alongside the Maui stuff, but that'll all work there. But yeah, totally do that. What are the
Right.
differences? Well, it depends. Visual Studio for Mac is still in preview, but obviously, Visual Studio for Mac is focused on, .NET Maui, Xamarin support, web development support, console, Azure Functions, Docker support. It's not going to have everything that you can do. Like, there's no like currently there's no like Xaml Live Preview or different trees, so they're building and adding tooling onto it over time in general, but I go back and forth between the two based on what I'm doing. But I think the nice thing is that your integrations for opening the projects and the integrations with Xcode and opening up iOS simulators are all obviously integrated deeply into that environment as well. So if you're on a Mac, you can use it on a Mac. If you're on Windows, you can use it on Windows, pretty much.
Right. So this is on the migration side of things. Like if people have existing WPF application, do we have an upgrade path to .NET Maui?
It's a good question. There's not like necessarily like a right-click upgrade to .NET Maui. Pretty much, you think about it, all your models, view models, all your .NET code should obviously, come over gracefully. Your XAML will need to be, optimized and rewritten a little bit because the controls and things are a little bit different. You should sort of say like, okay, well, what are my goals? What do I need to do? Am I only ever going to ship this app on Windows? Like, maybe don't upgrade it to anything else besides maybe .NET 6 with WPF. And then you'll be good to go. You could take advantage of the new .NET 6 stuff and .NET 7 when it comes out. That should be a relatively easy upgrade for versions of .NET. If you're like, hey, I have my WPF app and I need to go to other platforms, then you can look at, like, okay, what are my goals, right, of it? Is it what .NET Maui offers? There's other community projects and other libraries for .NET like Uno and Avalonia that help you do cross-platform UI with different UI technology stacks. Those might be good options too. That's the cool part about the C# and .NET ecosystem, is that a little bit of something for everyone. This is just what we offer from Microsoft, but all of those other projects like Uno's and Avalonia build on top of the iOS, Android, and Mac infrastructure that we provide there as well. But there is some guidance. I think if you just like Google that on looking at it, the differences, there's like a name comparison between the two, but most of the similarities are, most of the things that are different are with just some of the control names.
Right.
And navigation and accessing native stuff, right?
So on the similar lines, James, there were questions around if I am on Xamarin, how do I move to .NET Maui? Is there a easy way?
Yeah. So if you're migrating from Xamarin Forms to .NET Maui, there's a wiki article showing you how to do it. So the thing is, you can definitely like upgrade, change the namespaces, like all of your XAML is backwards compatible. There are a few things in the rendering layers that might look and feel, so you might have to make some tweaks. But I think the difference is there is like a command line tool, an upgrade assistant that you can run, but it's not going to do the single project support. It's not going to upgrade to the latest and greatest, startup code. So my thing that I'll be doing is like, I'll have my Xamarin Forms app, then I'm going to add a new Maui project and then move code into it, upgrade it, because my code, if you go to my YouTube channel or the .NET YouTube channel, we have all these great videos on all the new stuff, right? The built-in dependency injection service, these MVVM source generators. So you have to write any of this MVVM boilerplate code. It does all this stuff for you automatically. And that means that for my actual code, like I don't only just want to upgrade to .NET Maui, I want to modernize and get rid of all this old stuff that I used to have to write that I don't have to anymore in .NET Maui. So all these cross-platform images and stuff like that. So I look at it as, yeah, I can upgrade my code and change the namespaces, but is that going to bring me the most delight? Probably not. So I want to take a little bit of time to move some of those other resources over, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think one question on this Blazor.
Good question.
I think this is something I know. I know you have covered this in your talk, but I think we can recap on that. Like, how the Blazor, the HTML part is being rendered versus the C# code that we write in Blazor.
Correct.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So Blazor Hybrid, it is neither WebAssembly and neither server side. It is not WebAssembly. It is not server side. It's a third mode. Think of it as Blazor as the third mode. You have Blazor server, Blazor WebAssembly, and then Blazor Hybrid. What Blazor Hybrid does is it brings the Blazor component model and web view control to these other platforms that already run .NET, right? So your C# executable code is running on the .NET Maui .NET for iOS, Android, Mac, or Windows. It's running just natively there. You don't need WebAssembly because .NET already runs on iOS and Android, right? You don't need a server because iOS, Android, Mac, there's a native web view control. So your HTML, CSS is all rendered in the iOS, Android, Mac, or Windows web view. And that's just whatever web view is prevented. So web view and WebKit and web view 2. But the C# code, your .NET code, is executed on the .NET runtime that's already on the device because you're building a .NET Maui application. So that means by default, it's disconnected. By default, it's super fast because it's optimized and ahead of time compiled. Yeah.
Right. So Visual Studio 2022 for ARM.
Yeah, not yet. No. So Visual Studio 2022 for ARM was just released with 17.4 preview. There are a few workloads in there that are supported today. The team's working on it, though. Yeah.
Cool. I think we're good. There are a few other questions that I think I got it in while you were talking. So I guess I think we should go to the next one where we talk about the scalable backends, James. So let me bring in Trishella if she's around, if she has any questions.
Oh, I should say though, you can build Maui applications to run on ARM devices. That works.
Yep.
So it's just if you're developing with visuals, if you have an ARM machine, right? Which I don't know how many people do. I guess you have a Surface X today. There's a few other ARM devices. Then it's just at Visual Studio 2022 for Windows. Get the .NET Maui workload, which it will. But you today can build and deploy. I do it today. Build and deploy .NET Maui apps for ARM. That works today. So Rogue, to your question, it already supports it because Windows apps support ARM. So I want to make that very, very clear before we get out of here. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. All right. So let's. That was a great session, Trishella. You have any questions for James?
Wow, it was overwhelming for me. Amazing one. I actually learned a lot of concepts, but yeah, I was just seeing all the questions here. You answered it so brilliantly. No questions from my side, but all I could say is, I think a lot of people are excited to learn Maui and get started with that.
Awesome.
Cool.
I'm excited. If you have any questions, just feel free to reach out. And then, yeah, I'll be around. I'll hang around in the chat on YouTube and see if I can answer a few more questions as well.
Perfect. Yeah. Thank you so much, James. It's been
Thank you, James.
really great. I know every time we ask you to do a session with us, like you are like, yes, I'm ready for it, even though the time zones are like, far apart. So thank you so much. And we will look forward for your next session very soon.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Sounds
thank
good.
you,
Thanks,
James.
everyone.
I
Have
think
Thank
a
you,
we
good
have
one.
James.
energized a lot of people today.
Take care. Bye.
Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.
All right, Vivek, are you
Oh,
ready?
James has set a high standard. Right.
Yeah. So, so all right.
Yep.
So,
So, if people want to get started with the Maui, right, we have the cloud skill challenge. So, we can go ahead and deep dive into this cloud skill challenge. Yeah, or else you can also join us tomorrow and try this out with us while
yeah. So
we going to do this
tomorrow
hands-on,
we
right,
have
Nish?
this. Yeah. So tomorrow we have an in-person event. So if you are from Bengaluru, you can come into Microsoft Office at Reactor, and we will be able to help you write your first Maui app. And if you want to watch us do this, you can also join us online. So if you scan this QR code, you can get to that event and sign up there. All right. So what else, Vivek?
So we're going
So the
to
next
talk
session.
about, yeah, talk about how do we connect these apps to backend, right? So
Yeah.
how do we scale it, right? So it's still now we talked about how to build the UI for the app and how to use it from different platforms. But now we'll go deep dive and see how we can uh, connect this to Azure, connect this to cloud so that you can scale your application, right? So let me go to the first gen pass. What is first gen pass, Nish? How was it? 10
Yeah.
years
So
back we're talking
here's the
about?
thing. Yeah, here's the thing. So when you're building mobile apps, I think the one thing that we need to be sure of that we are building for millions of users who are going to use it within a short span of time. Like I mean, they open the app, they are just there for a short span, and they want to have your app working there. So if you're connecting to the backends and things like that, make sure that your infrastructure is great, scalable, and it's also listening to those users from around the world, from different geolocations and things like that, right? So I know as developers, one of the things that we start to focus very recently is when you start building microservices and things like that, we start to look at more as an infrastructure like Kubernetes and things like that. Like Kubernetes has become the de facto standard because when you build microservices, you have multiple business domains that you need to work with. Then you have integration between other services and things like that. So we it's overwhelming, right? So PaaS was one of the options where people looked at okay, how do I create a backend, right? But if you look at the first gen PaaS, that actually focused on just the web applications. That's all about, like if you are a HTML CSS developer and you are building some like websites, you are looking at deploying it to the cloud provider, right? And basically what it was just an abstraction over the VMs and infrastructure as a service. The biggest challenge that came with that is you're tightly coupled to the cloud provider, right? So that was the challenge with the first gen pass. That's why we started looking at how should we do the next gen pass. Like how do we enable developers who are writing backends for mobile, web, everything like microservices? How do they get the benefit of the infrastructure that they have without really tuning into the cloud providers way of writing apps behind, right?
So
So mhm,
when I have used Heroku, a long time back,
mhm.
obviously it was tightly coupled, right? Because it was deployed directly into the Heroku's system, right? So yeah, I'm going to move on to the next gen pass. How this next gen looks like. Uh, Obviously, there is a support for containers and functions, and you could build your own pass. In fact, now, right? So with
Mhm.
all of these things, you can build your own pass and set it up for your usage, right? So what are the other things, Nish, you think next gen pass looks like for you?
Yeah, I think so. So one of the important aspect is, as I mentioned, like Kubernetes has become the de facto standard for your backends and where the scalability comes into picture, right? But the biggest challenge with Kubernetes is being a developer, you start to focus on more on the infrastructure side, try to learn Kubernetes YAMLs, and try to understand how these nodes and pod scaling and all those things work. So next gen pass is all about you can build your backend, containerize them, but you don't have to really worry about the infrastructure under the hood. Instead, you bring in your own code model. and it is very unopinionated. You can bring whatever, Java, .NET, whatever, right? So it doesn't matter. You bring those in, and then you deploy as your package your application into images, and then we kind of like provide a way to scale your applications, right? So it doesn't matter whether you may, the day you don't want to use the cloud, you want to go to on-prem, you can take that with you, right? Because you're not following a particular guideline from the cloud provider. And I think the important aspect here is also it's all building on open source technologies, and not something which you are baking in under the hood, or something. Everything that is being offered is can be looked at in the source code and see how this has been done.
Definitely. And from an Azure application perspective, right? So today we are discussing how do we put your app, the mobile app, and connect with the backend with the Azure platform, which is the cloud platform, to scale your applications, as you told, right? If you're building a mobile application, it has to be scalable, and you're building it for global audience, right? So if people are using your app, so it has to be scaled, and there are different options in within Azure. You could use Kubernetes, you could even go back and use virtual machines. Obviously there are databases, different kinds of databases which you can use, and some kind of services as well, which is cognitive services and other services, to make sure that you have AI built into your application. And also there is tooling part of it, right? There is bunch of tooling which is existing for you to drive stuff. But today we are going to discuss about platform as a service, right? So there is a couple of things, that Azure App Service, Spring App, container apps, and you could also use functions. One of the demo which even James did was on the podcast app, and which we are also going to deep dive into how it is architected, and how we are going, and how it has been set up. Even before we go there, we are going to talk about Azure Container Apps, just for the introduction purpose. And also we have a specific session on Azure Container Apps coming up, and the Azure Happy Hour on 16th of September. So I'm looking forward to it, and Nish is going to go deep dive into that container apps as well. So moving on, Nish, what is Azure Container Apps? Uh, Go ahead and just
I
introduce
was
container
very
apps to
very
the
excited.
audience.
Yeah, I was very very excited when they announced Azure Container Apps. It was in preview. I got in some early preview too, and tried this out. It was really amazing. I mean, so if people didn't know my background, like I worked on Xamarin for a very long time, and then I moved into microservices world. Like I maintain the .NET slash architecture. There's amazing reference guides, and one of the reference sample that I maintain is called the eShop on Containers, which is a humongous sample with. It's still a reference sample, but we talk about microservices. How do you containerize your application to writing CQRS, and creating bounded context, and deciding what is your business boundary for your microservices and things like that. um, and it also has a eShop mobile client. That's something which was working on Xamarin Forms. We put it to .NET Maui, and that is the wiki that we are talking about, where there is a migration guide story as well in that. Well, coming back to Azure Container Apps, I mean, the biggest thing at eShop and Containers was to maintain Kubernetes Helm charts and YAMLs and scripts like that. It was Kubernetes fun. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's amazing. But the challenge that it comes
YAMLing
with
is
is,
hard.
yeah,
YAMLing
yeah,
is hard.
and getting a new developer onboarded, it was super hard, because it has a lot of infrastructure related learning curve that you need to understand. If you did not have that kind of a background, it would be hard for you to, I mean, you will get stuck just figuring out how these things all worked or came together, right? So Azure Container Apps is built on top of Kubernetes, but kind of giving you the layer hidden from in that. You don't have to do any of those things that you do in Kubernetes, and I have recorded the demo, and I'll show you how this is done. The good thing about container apps is that it's simply a serverless container platform. So basically, if you have container, that means if you have a Docker image, if you have a code that you can put it into a Docker image, and it can be two, three things. Like for example, it can be a REST API or a gRPC endpoint that it's listening to, or it could be a worker template or something like a background services, right? As long as you can containerize it, Azure Container Apps can just simply run it. And basically, because it is directly targeted to microservices and the developers, it focuses on a few things like service to service communication. That is brought in by a technology called Dapper, which is again an open source technology, right? And if you want to do load balancing, like, you want to do HTTP traffic between 80% traffic to you, one of your services, which is like in beta, probably to 20% traffic, sorry, 20% to your beta and 80% to your large production and things like that. So if you want to do some kind of load balancing, you have Envoy proxy. Again, it's an open source technology, right? And the other interesting thing that I love about Azure Container Apps is the CADA. Using the CADA, you can actually set a trigger. For example, if I have an Azure storage and I have a lot of messages there, based on the messages and the queue count, I can scale my containers. So that's just a simple configuration and I'm not even writing in YAML. I can write it in Bicep or a ARM template, which is nothing but the Azure Resource Manager template. So those are JSON files, and you can just write them there, and then part of your CI/CD, it takes care of deploying and scaling depending on what is in your storage and things like that. All right, let's go to the next slide.
These are some of the example scenarios.
Mhm.
As you mentioned, right? There is HTTP traffic which you can split between two different versions of your application. So basically, you have two uh, containers, and you have revision versions, and you can set the percentage on top of these versions, and you can obviously auto scale on top of it. And you mentioned, right, as you can build auto scaling system based on the level of usage, basically CPU or memory load and other things, and obviously the scaling by messages in the queue,
Mhm.
which is one more way of doing it. And microservices, this is the most amazing use case of container apps, right, where you have dappers and have keda for scale purpose, scaling for a specific triggers, and dappers to interact between different services. And we will see all of these things in a demo,
Yeah.
obviously not today on 16th. Couple of deep dive sessions which we are going to
But
do on
in my
this today.
demo, yeah, I do have an end-to-end coverage in terms of like which is tooling support. As a developer, you don't have to worry about infrastructure at all. And to the point that we will be showing how .NET Podcast architecture behind the scenes, where we use Azure Container Apps. So
Perfect.
I'll be covering those aspects for sure today.
Perfect. So let's go ahead and spend some time on how this exactly works, right? So you have containers in a Kubernetes world, you call it them as pods, and you just go and deploy these containers onto container apps, and you can see there is an environment which is basically you can deploy these different container apps within the same environment to have those connectivities. So if you have dappers, it can easily discover different services. So this is where the environment comes into picture, where you have microservices being deployed on top of that, and it's pretty easy to do this, right? And I'll show you while doing the demo, like if you have a GitHub repo, and how you can in fact deploy code to Azure Container Apps as well. So anything else you want to talk about, Nish, before I go and deep dive into the demo?
Just a quick thing. The container environment is basically the outer boundary where you want to keep all the apps that, if, for example, if there are services that you need to connect to each other, like using Dapper, then it needs to be in the same virtual network, and that's what the container environment is all about. And revisions are something which is like having multiple versions of
Versions.
your own, yeah, apps, services, and you can actually switch between them. You can do A/B testing, or you can do blue green deployment. So those are revisions, but these are all familiar concepts that you already know. It's just that it is there in these kind of business boundaries, and the configuration, the way you try to achieve them, may be slightly different from what you may be used to already.
Perfect.
Yeah. So that's a
So
code
I
push
think,
thing, which you,
yeah,
sorry,
I think this is a simple
sorry,
code push.
there's a lag here.
Yeah.
So I was just saying that technically, once you set this up entirely, the CI/CD pipeline is set. I mean, if you even now you can go and take a look at the .NET Podcast app. It's one of the nicely done CI/CD pipelines. You can actually fork the repo, just change some add some secrets to your GitHub actions, sorry, GitHub, yeah, GitHub Actions secrets. Once you add that, and it'll take care of deploying everything, and then you can see how the CI/CD pipeline is all set up, and it's pretty easy. It's a great sample to kind of look at and see how you can use this in your business apps too. Good.
Perfect. So let me just do a quick demo. Okay. So let's go and take some code. This is a simple Blazor app, which even James was showing. So nothing much. It's already there, and we are not going to do much of a change. Say, for example, we have Microsoft Reactor demo, and we'll just remove this and say, okay, Microsoft Reactor, and just save it. We save something there, and let's go and build this app, and basically build it, in fact, as a container. um, let's do that with version 9 of this. So it's a Blazor app. It's a simple Blazor app, the one which we already seen. So I've just made some changes to the title just to for the demo purpose, and it's getting built. And once it is built, what we are going to do is we are going to push this to the Azure Container Registry. So I already have a couple of things. Let me show you this. So all resources. So let me go to this container registry. So I already have container registry set, Azure Container Registry, and container apps is also being deployed. But it's pretty easy to create a container apps as we were discussing. So I just go to create resource, uh, and go to containers here and go to container apps. You select any of these, give it a name, vtest 001, and you have an environment. So this is the environment which we were talking about, and this is, just you can go and create a new environment as well, with redundancy and other things for the scaling purpose. As we talked about, it's basically about creating a vnet and virtual network of this, and you can give it a name, or you can go back and monitoring and networking. These are all default, and you can also use the one which is you already have. If as you, it will ask you the details. Then you can just go and create it and just review and create. So when you do this review and create, basically you will get a container apps ready with all of these three things, which is log, container apps, and the environment. Okay, so it will be set, uh, and it is all ready, and container registry is all ready for demo purpose. It is all ready for now, and we can go back and see that this is going to be the page, and this is what we edited, and it's all up and running now. So new version is what we have just created, and what we are going to do now is we go here and go to Docker, and we did create version 9. So we're just going to push this into Azure. Okay, so it gets pushed to the Azure Container Registry. It will be quick. So as um, Nish was mentioning, we go to the container registry, sorry, the container apps. You will see a couple of things here, right? There is secrets, there's authentication, there's continuous deployment. You can easily set continuous deployment. You just go to continuous deployment, you know select your GitHub id, organization, repository on which the code is, and where you want to push your container and everything, and then all set, and it will go, and it will be GitHub actions will be ready for you, and you can just go back and use it, right? And there is dappers and everything is ready. And if I go to the revision management, here is the couple of revisions also you can have. Currently I have only one. You can have more. Here is where you can choose which mode you want to have. Is that you want to have a single active mode, or you want to have a multiple active mode? you can make those choices. And for example, now we want to go and deploy a new version, or we can go and update this version, right? So you can add a new version revision as well, or you can just go back and update this, because right now I already have version 8, but now we're going to move it to version 9, because we already pushed the image right to the container registry. Now version 9 is ready, and I'm going to save this, and everything is up. So I'll just create. This is a new deployment. You might see that this has to go, and it will be just Microsoft Reactor. So it's attempting to connect. So it is getting deployed right now. It should be up. So yeah, so demo is gone, and this is what it is. And by the way, when Nish, the question is up there for you. Uh, when are we having
What's the
samosa
question?
and chai? When are we having samosa and chai?
Oh,
Have you
okay, that
ordered?
question. I was looking at the question in the. Okay, so the question
Okay.
is, hello, Nish. By the way, I saw someone asking what is samosa. So those of you who are following us from outside of India, in India we have a snack called samosa, which is I don't know, potatoes, masalas baked into a thin layer of I don't know how do
Onions.
I put this? Yeah.
Onions.
So
I think
okay.
we are going to bring in Trishala now. That's next up.
Yeah. So yeah, that's a chat. So basically the show was started as a chai time or a tea time chat, and that is why the name is samosa chai. And so okay, answering to your question, Vivek, when are we having samosa and chai? Tomorrow, because we are going to learn at Reactor, right? We are, yeah, we are doing some hands-on code on .NET Maui.
Definitely. I think tomorrow we're meeting at Microsoft Reactor Bangalore, and if you're in Bangalore, just hop in, and obviously you have to be registered. So here is where you can register, and you can just hop in. Else, you can also join us online. We'll be live, and we're going to do this 3 hours of hands-on workshop on Maui. Like, you can try it out on your own. So that's what it is. So Nish, I'm going back because this is just an introduction to container apps, right? So,
Yep.
but now we want to see how exactly this works with the mobile app
Yeah, sure.
development.
So go to the next slide. So we have this amazing .NET Podcast app, and so James and I worked with the teams to build this app. And the thing that we try to tell people when we are building is like we're not going to make it complicated. It's going to be extremely simple for people to get onboarded and get started. So that's why the architecture is also very simple. I mean, it's something which can be resonated with everyone, like understanding how to build a podcast app. So you saw the listen together mode where we were able to send reactions and things like that. That was built in Blazor hybrid and then connected with SignalR. So if you go to the next slide, Vivek, so I'll just explain the architecture there. So basically, it has the .NET Maui app, and it also has the Blazor app, which is the web application that you saw, and there's a part of it which was called the Listen Together component. That's what we kind of like matched it with the hybrid scenario, where let's say in a situation where you want to get to native, but you have this hybrid app. Sorry, if you have this web thing ready, and if you want to bake that into mobile quickly to see maybe to do a user testing whether people are liking it or not, to look at that scenario like that, we baked in into the web browser, and then everything on the C# side of things run on the Blazor on the runtime, and everything HTML CSS rendered on the browser side of things. The important thing is it connects to the Azure Container Apps. I mean, when Vivek was doing the demo, one thing you would have seen is it gives you that URL, and that URL is given to you automatically by Azure Container Apps. So if you were to do it in Kubernetes, you'll set the load balancer, get an IP, and then you configure DNS. That's a really heavy work to do. But ACA, what it does is it gives you that URL. It also gives you the HTTPS endpoint. That means it's a secure line when you're connecting with your mobiles and things like that, right? So in the Azure Container Apps, there are three main container apps there. One is the podcast API, which is nothing but a REST endpoint, which is listening to all the, for example, the mobile apps connecting and checking for new podcasts and things like that. It also has an API to get a new podcast request. For example, if I know that a new .NET podcast exists and I want it to be in that app, I can submit a request using this podcast API. And what podcast API is doing is it's not going to take it and then directly put it in the database, because we don't want spams. So what we do is we put it into a storage queue, and that's where we are using the Azure storage queue. And as and when the messages increases, we have the podcast ingestion service, which is nothing but a background task. It's going to wake up. It's going to be like, for the first time when you deploy it, we say, okay, scale is 0. That means the app is not even going to be running. So when it actually sees a feed queue being filled, that's when it just kicks in. And that's the beauty of Azure Container Apps, because it's using Kata to know what it's actually listening to the storage queue. And if there is a message, that's when we are actually bringing the ingestion service into the picture, processing that information. Basically, it's a very simple one. We are just looking for .NET in the title, or Maui in the title, or Blazor in the title, and then approving them into the databases, right? So it's a very simple app. Now, to show you the Azure PaaS from more than one scenarios, we also use the Azure App Service Linux, which is, again, you containerize it, and you can, once it's a container image, you can choose to deploy to Azure Container Apps, or you can choose to deploy to Azure App Service for Linux. So both the SignalR Hub and the web server, we showed it how to do it in Azure App Services. So what we're going to do is, what I did is, because I want to show the entire aspects of this, I recorded the video. So I'm going to play that video. And the reason for that is because if I have to do this live, I would have to wait for the Azure to kind of kick in and deploy, and I would not be able to show you the entire scenario. So I wanted you to see the entire end-to-end scenario from a developer perspective, how easy it is to get started with Visual Studio, connect to Azure Container Apps, and to set up the CI/CD and things like that, which is automatically done. And then also to briefly look at the scalability aspect that I talked about Azure Container Apps, which are very relevant to the mobile applications and things like that. So let's
Nish,
go ahead and
before we go there, right? So
yeah.
the container apps which is deployed here is basically in one environment, or it has different container apps, or how is
Yeah,
it?
it is a single environment. So both podcast API, podcast ingestion, podcast updater, they're all working in a single environment. Because again, as I mentioned, the reason why you want to look at a different environment is when you do not want two services to work with each other, like they want
Each
in a
other.
secure
Yeah,
environment. Otherwise, it's okay to use a single environment for this, right? Cool.
got it.
Let's go ahead and play this video, and it's going to play it to the stream, and I will be muting myself so that it doesn't look weird. Podcast API backend in Visual Studio. Create a new project, choose ASP.NET Core Web API, provide a name, and make sure to check the Docker support in it. And then click Create, and this will give a default Web API project. And because it has Docker file in it, the Visual Studio detects that Docker was not running, so it goes ahead and starts Docker Desktop. Take a bit of time, but then it just goes and builds the images, and then now we're ready to go. The project by default gives me a weather forecast endpoint, so I'm going to change that to something like categories, which may be relevant to the podcast API. I'm going to leave the implementation as is because I'm just going to create as a sample, but I also going to create another endpoint, which is called shows, and I can just remove those weather forecast implementation there, and I'm just simply going to return a string. Probably I'm going to write return all episodes, or maybe I can just type return shows, which is great. Now I have two endpoints. I'm going to change the name as well, and I'm going to run this in Docker. When I do run, you can see that I have by default, I get the Swagger endpoint. So I have categories and shows right there. I can expand it and execute, and you can see the response has shows in it. Now let's go and publish this in Azure. So if you right click and publish, you get this menu, and you can choose Azure here. You can also choose Docker Container Registry if you're just simply creating an image. Now here I'm going to choose Azure Container Apps. You see preview, but it's now GA, but I'm going to choose that and click next. Now this one gives me to select container apps. I'm going to create a new one. I'm going to create a name. It creates environment. It provides resource groups and other things. Make sure you select the right ones and then click create. Now this will go ahead and create the environment for me. The one more step over here is to create the registry as well, so that you want to keep it in a secure registry, the images that you create. So I'll just choose mine, which is already there, which is the Nish demos. So I'll go ahead and click finish. And now you can see it already created an endpoint for me, ingress, which including HTTPS there. And that comes free for it, Azure Container Apps, right? I can go and choose Swagger to see, all right, there's nothing there. Now I need to publish because that's when my image is going to be picked up by Container Apps, right? So I do that. And now let's go see what's the response. Now, if I go do Swagger, I should be getting the same thing that we saw earlier. That's it. Categories and shows right there. We'll also look at how to publish this into Azure App Services as well. So this is also available in Visual Studio. So this time I choose Azure App Service on Linux, click Next, and then choose the app service instance that I want to deploy to. I don't have one, so I'm going to create a new one and call this as Podcast API Test, choose a hosting plan and create. And because I'm working with APIs, Visual Studio also gives me one more step. If I want to, I can go ahead and create this API management as well, so that I can secure my APIs and provide this endpoint instead of the other endpoint created by the app services. And I can create all sort of policies to let people in, right? So I'm going to just create it with the podcast as an API URL suffix. So this is going to be, the Visual Studio is going to talk to the Azure App Services and Azure API Management and create necessary things that is required. It's all done in Visual Studio. So I click finish. It's going to go do everything that it needs to do to get things ready for us. So it's going to take a little bit of time. In this video, just a little bit fast forwarded, but it'll take a bit of time, but it's all going to work great. Now, if you look at Podcast API Management, which is what created there, so you see that there's a gateway URL. Now I can navigate to that URL and see if my endpoint is accessible. So it says no, access denied, because it requires a subscription key. And that's the thing that comes default. So I can go ahead and disable that for this demo. You can think of how else you want to secure these APIs. Those policies can be written. But for this demo, I'm just going to remove the subscription required checkbox from here. So if I go ahead and uncheck the subscription required and then go down, and then there's a save option, click on that, and this is going to, refresh the endpoint. Now, if I go back to the API endpoint with categories, and let's say refresh this, and now if we see the categories, basically the weather forecast, whatever we wrote. All right. So far, this source code is on my local, so I can go ahead and add to my source control. I'm going to choose GitHub. You can choose Azure DevOps if you want to, but I'll add in GitHub credentials here so that I can publish this repository into my GitHub. So I'm going to enter my details there and also change a few things, like let's go ahead and change the name, repository name, to podcast-API instead of dot. And I'll leave that to be a private repository for now, but you can go ahead and change it if you want to. Create and push. So this will take care of taking my source code and publishing it there. Now, if I do a publish again, it asks me for registry. That's okay because I have it. Now look at this. It has CI/CD option as well. So instead of publishing directly to Azure, I can choose this option. What it is going to do, it's going to create a CI/CD pipeline as well for me. And this is all Visual Studio doing all the amazing things that it can do, right? So now it says whatever you go change, and then if it's push, then it is going to go and deploy as well. So just to see this working, what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the endpoint, or I'm going to add the endpoint. We call this as episodes. And then simply, let's call it as episodes. Let me type it right. That's it. And then commit the changes as always. Now, if I say commit all, and then the next step is syncing. So I'll go ahead and sync this repository. So now my local and my remote is synced. So I'll go back to check. So I'll log into my GitHub. And in this case, I'll just directly go into my repositories. Forgot the name that I gave. So I'll go to the repositories and then search for it. I think, yeah, that's Podcast API Test. So I'm going to click on that. And there you go. You can see that, it's already running. So that means the workflow is all set up for me. And this is all done by Visual Studio. I did not even type all these things in, right? So you can go and change it if you want to. So there's also code there. So there you go. It's built and deployed to container registry, and then it is going to pull into container apps as well. So if I refresh, there you go. So now I have the new endpoint set up. So you can see how CI/CD entire pipeline is also set up for me. Great. Just to recap, we created a new project in Visual Studio, which is a core web API project. We added Docker support into it, and then we modified a few endpoints, which are great. We ran it locally. That's all fine. That's something which you probably already know. What we did is right-click Publish, and where we chose Azure Platform as a Service offerings, which were Azure Container Apps and Azure App Services for Linux. We also looked at Azure API Management. The important thing is how easy it is to set all these things from Visual Studio. You didn't have to do anything in CLI, do anything in Azure Portal, but Visual Studio took care of everything that is required. And we also looked, when we added the source code to GitHub repository, it also gave me an option to set up the CI/CD pipeline as well. So that means it just goes and creates a GitHub Actions workflow files for me. So the basic setup is done for me. So I modify the code changes, it can directly deploy into something like Azure Container Apps, which is even awesome. Now let's take a look at .NET Podcast App, which you can find on github.com/Microsoft.NET-podcast. Now this is a simple podcast app which has a .NET Maui front end, which connects iOS, Android, Windows, and Mac, and also has scalable backend, which includes Azure Container Apps. If you look at the architecture of .NET Podcast, it has the .NET Maui frontend, which means it has iOS, Android, macOS, and Windows application. It also has a hybrid app baked into it, which uses Blazor. That's the Listen Together one. We'll see that in a bit. Now, if you look at the backend, it has Azure App Services. Now, this is great. It has a couple of things: podcast API, podcast ingestion, podcast worker. Well, podcast API is just nothing but the web API endpoint, which we saw earlier. And podcast ingestion and worker, they're all background services. They are running behind the scenes to particularly looking at some functionality. So in this case, let's take an example. Like if someone wants to submit a podcast, they can access the podcast API and submit the podcast with certain information. But now all the podcast that is submitted shouldn't be going into our database. So what we do is we send it to an Azure storage account. It's into the feed queue. And there, podcast ingestion service is actually going to look at it, and it is going to process them. And if it is relevant to this .NET podcast, it is going to pick that up and then send it to the SQL Server database. Now, there's also Log Analytics Workspace. That's all comes within the Azure Container Apps. We also have SignalR for doing Listen Together, which is really amazing. That is when you want to share a particular podcast with somebody else and then want to react and respond to certain things that are spoken there. We use SignalR and show you how to do that, including the Blazor WASM there. Finally, this is a great architecture to see how to build a simple podcast app. If you open this podcast app in Visual Studio, you'll see a Docker Compose file, which is a great way to run multiple applications within the containers locally. Now you can send some environment variables here, but I'm not going to get into the details of these, but let's look at how to run this, right? So if you go to Docker Compose, you can run it, but I want to show you these Docker Compose launch settings where you can choose which ones you really want to debug, and the other ones you can just simply say you do not want to debug, so that way you're only working with the services that you absolutely need to debug. Now I'll go ahead and run this all together. So it's going to boot up everything. It's going to build all the images, and there you go. So now I have the podcast API endpoint, which is with all the feeds and other things where you can submit a new podcast, or you can also query for podcasts, which is already in there in the database. I can also go to 5001, which is a Listen Together hub. It's a SignalR service. And I have 5002, which is the podcast website. And now this is a web page. And if you click sign in, now this is a Blazor app. If you go in, you can see that the ones that I've subscribed to, and I can start playing. You may not be able to listen to the music. I'm able to hear here. I can modify a few things like increasing the speed and things like that. It's accessing these APIs for running the soundtrack onto the audio channels, right? So now if I go to the Listen Together mode, this is very, very exciting for me. If you see, I can create a new room so that I can invite others to join. So here I'm going to give my name as Nish and start opening the room. So now I have the invite code or the copy code. Now I can send this to somebody else. Now, because while recording this, I don't have another person here, so I'm going to use a new private window and open the same URL. And now I'm a new person here. And if I go to the Listen Together mode, I can join the room using the code that was created there. So if you'd see, that's the code that we created. If I copy paste that and say join the room, now I can give Matt as another user here. I'm just going to show you an example. So I'm going to go side by side. You can see the dark theme and the bright theme. And if I play here, you can see on the right, that also plays. And I can also send my reactions so for certain things that's being spoken there. So that way you can see how two apps are connected and it is able to react and respond to things. This is all the magic of Signal R. And if you are excited about doing this, something like a chat app, you can go ahead and take a look at the source code and implement something for yourself. Now, what I did not show you today is executing the .NET Maui app, which you can also try it for yourself. If you go into that podcast app, there is a folder where you can execute the Maui apps. You can make sure that you have Maui workloads so that you can run this locally. You can also debug them locally or connect to the remote services. They're all going to work great. Just go to the .NET Podcast GitHub repository and it has all the instructions to get you started. What I love about this architecture is that we are using Azure Container Apps as the mobile backend. The good thing about that is it obviously supports the auto scalability feature, which is what we are going to look at it right now. And the other thing is it can scale down to 0, which means you can save some cost too. So this is all done using Keda. So we're not going to go into the details of it, but I'm going to show you in .NET Podcast how we managed to use this feature. Remember I told you there's a feed queue where every podcast that has been submitted goes in, and let's see how that podcast ingestion service is scaled. Now in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the ARM template where we write the details of podcast container apps. Within the container apps configuration, we kind of like provide the details of we need an ingress, which that means we need to expose it externally. And then we have a few things that we can set it up here, which is one of the things is the scalability factor, which I was talking to you about. So right now there's a min replica is 1, max replica is 5. That means based on the scalable rule that we set here, in this case, HTTP scaling, that means if you have 20 concurrent requests or more, then Container Apps is going to scale your apps automatically. And the good thing is if you set min replica to 0, you can also scale down to 0 when there is absolutely no traffic as well. If you look at the ingestion service, we set the min replica to be 0 and the max replicas to be 5, which makes sense for this service. If you look at the scalability rule here, we are looking at the feed queue, which is the storage queue which I was talking about. So if we have really a lot of queues of podcasts coming in, and that's when we want to scale. So depending on the queue length, we scale to maximum of 5 replicas, and that is going to go ahead and process those new podcasts that is coming in and ingest into the database. To see this in action, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a simple script that is going to send in a lot of new podcasts into the service. So here we go. So I have something called a simulate-feed-request.ps1, and I'm hitting those URLs, which is nothing but the podcast API web point. And on the top left, you can see the message count going up to 57, 50. And on the right and left, those are the replicas. One is the web API on the top, and the bottom is the worker. And now I'm again hitting more so that, we can see the scalability, and you can see that on the top, based on the web scaling rule, there are 2 replicas now. And in the bottom, there is this worker, which is now increased to 3 replicas. Now that is so cool that it automatically is able to do that. Now, if you look at the workers, look at the handler part of it, all that it is doing here is basically this worker is going to be initiated. This is a fairly simple one. All that it is doing is looking for the .NET keyword in its title and accepting it. So based on certain configurations, we were able to scale up as and when there is demand. All right, now let's go look at the portal on how this has been configured. So see, these are the things that gets defaultly configured. And if I go into the podcast API CA, which is Container Apps, and if I wait for a little bit of time, you'll see the URLs and things like that come up there. So that's the URL which it's being hosting the API. Now, if I go to the Dapper, if I have to enable Dapper, I can go ahead and do that. But for this demo, I am not using Dapper, so I have disabled it. I can go into the containers or scale, for example, and see what is the configuration. So if I have to do this in Portal, I can also go ahead and do that. But I think it's better to do it in the in your ARM templates, and CI/CD takes care of everything that way, right? Cool. This is the ingress where the external traffic has been enabled or disabled. It's a pretty cool demo, so I hope you liked it. All right, so that was pretty much a packed content into a single video. I knew that we needed to get it to 15 minutes, but I needed to show so many things that I needed to, because Visual Studio has some really amazing features for where you don't see everything is running on Kubernetes, and I did not do anything Kubernetes. I did not move out of the Visual Studio. I was able to do everything from Visual Studio, and that was the key message that I really wanted to stress upon.
You need at least 2 to 3 Samosa Chai episode to do it live.
Hmm. Yep.
That's the back content there.
I know. I know. If folks, if you find this video to be really fast and you didn't understand, so the same URL where you're watching this, you will see the video again. So feel free to go back and pause and watch as you want to see it. And also let us know. I mean, if you have any questions, I know some questions came in. We can take those questions as well. But before that, we can wrap up on things that you wanted to say, so that.
Yeah, that's it. So I think we are done with all the demos today, and
Mhm.
this is the Cloud Skill Challenge which we are running. So please take a look at it, and try the Maui yourself, right? So that's something interesting. So I completed one of the module there, so which is getting started with it, right? So even I'm a beginner there, so it is amazing. So there is a couple of things in that 7 part learn module. So go ahead and try it out. And if you want to join us, probably tomorrow, you can also join us. So I'm going to show you where you can go back and sign in, but also we will put it in the chat as well. Where is it? Where is it? Here. You can also join us tomorrow and try it with us, right? Right, Nish?
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so I'm just looking at questions if we have any on that side. Okay, so we have a question from Paolo regarding, do I have to update my pods to use Dapper in order to use the container services? You don't have, yeah, yes and no, it depends. Like, for example, if you just want to enable Dapper APIs in your container services, you just go and toggle the switch. But if you want to make use of it completely, using those Dapper sidecars, like if you have messaging things, you have contracts that you want to connect to, all those things you may want to use how Dapper uses, like localhost slash, and if you're using a state store, you use state store and things like that, like V1. So those aspects you may have to modify in the URL and make slight changes so that your app is aware of the sidecar. Okay.
Definitely. Yep.
So I think it's a similar question to, I have containers that already access the service bus. For instance, do I have to modify my code to use Dapper? Well, I think if you want to make use of Dapper in its full potential, you probably want to modify it so that you use them as a contract. And the advantage you get is you not only Azure Service Bus, if you future you switch to something else, you can change the Dapper's configurations and switch to those service buses too.
Yep. I mean, whenever you enable Dapper, not much of a code change, so that's still
Yep.
usable. Right? Yep.
All right. So Vivek, yet
Cool.
another episode of Samosa Chai. That's pretty
Yeah,
awesome.
that was fully packed, and how many hours? Like 2.5 hours now, which is good.
Yeah. Good. All right. Let's wrap it.
Okay, let's wrap
Thank
it.
you.
Thank you, folks, for joining in. Thank you, Nish, for hosting, and thank you, Trishala, for hosting the session. See you. Take care. Bye bye. Good night. Good morning. What is it? Good afternoon. Bye. Take care.